Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about alcohol and alcoholism. So to get started, I do want to explain how this is related to autism. This is related to autism because autism causes dysregulation between glutamate and GABA, which I'm going to describe a little bit later, which is why a lot of autistic individuals are more prone to alcoholism, because alcoholism temporarily shifts that ratio between GABA and glutamate by temporarily boosting GABA and by temporarily reducing glutamate. And so it makes sense that if glutamate is completely dysregulated, like it is in many conditions, the people with those conditions would be more likely to become alcoholics. It's not just autism, by the way. This is very, very true for bipolar disorder. I almost want to say, shout out to bipolar disorder from the number of friends and other individuals that I've met with bipolar who are also alcoholics or have had problems with that in the past. In my personal journey, I don't drink. I grew up in a family of alcoholics and over time have observed their behaviors and have used that as a useful way for me to learn more about alcohol. So I want to give you some statistics, some peer-reviewed statistics about using alcohol as a coping mechanism among autistic individuals for sensory issues, social anxiety, and other issues. Autistic adults are 9 times more likely to use substances to manage behaviors and 3 times more likely to use them for mental health. 54% of people who drink report binge drinking. 45% are unwilling to seek help due to fears of chaotic environments. Autistic people face a 2 to 4-fold increased risk of alcohol use disorder compared to the general population. The strongest evidence was a study of 26,986 individuals. And even though autistic people typically report overall lower alcohol consumption, it is the binge drinking that is really such a huge problem. Autism diagnosis, especially later on in life, is a specific risk factor for substance use. 20% of youth in SUD treatment have undiagnosed elevated autistic traits, and autistic individuals are 9 times more likely to use substances to cope. So, societally, we have an alcohol problem. Maybe hopefully that's already obvious. If you're listening to this, hopefully you already know that. But we have an alcohol problem. The media pushes alcohol. Other people push alcohol. And the reason for that is that alcohol temporarily boosts neurotransmitters like oxytocin and other things. So it makes people feel good. But then what happens when that wears off? Downregulation. So I want to explain briefly what is upregulation and what is downregulation. Upregulation would be like when receptors become more sensitive, or your brain would make more of those receptors. Downregulation would be when those receptors become either less sensitive or your brain compensates by reducing those receptors. So, backing up a little bit, referencing some of my other content, let's look at what is glutamate. Glutamate, at a neurochemistry level, is an excitatory neurotransmitter. What this means is it's the go signal for the brain. So if you go to the gym and you feel pumped, like you're the Hulk, like you could throw an axe or something, or lift a car, that feeling of, I can do this, and that feeling of taking action, besides noradrenaline, which obviously plays a big role here, that intensity is often tied to glutamate. If you've lifted weights, while you're lifting weights, glutamate spikes. And so, I don't know if anyone listening has migraine issues, but if you have migraine issues and you lift weights, sometimes weights can trigger visuals. So you should know that. But anyways, I digress. So glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, which basically starts neurons firing. And it's going to have different effects depending on which part of the brain we're talking about. But normally there are these transporters in the brains called EATT, and that's excitatory amino acid transporter. And you can think of this like as a little vacuum cleaner in the brain that's supposed to clear glutamate out in between synapses. It's supposed to clear glutamate. But if you have some of those genetic variants that prevents glutamate clearance, like in autism or other conditions, that glutamate's going to sit there. And it might feel like restlessness, like I have to move in order to feel okay. It might feel like anxiety, like I just feel something's off and I don't know what it is. And it might feel like you just want to keep pacing. You're sitting, then you stand, then you sit, then you stand, then you sit, then you stand. Why is movement such a huge part of this? Because movement helps clear glutamate. That's one of the healthy coping mechanisms for glutamate overload. But let's talk about the unhealthy coping mechanisms. So alcohol spikes GABA temporarily. What is GABA? GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. GABA is like the brakes, pressing on the brakes. If glutamate is a car, GABA is pressing the brakes. They inverse each other, kind of. There's so many other nuances here. If you know more about me in this topic, bear with me. I'm trying to simplify things as much as possible. But GABA basically calms the brain down. And a lot of people really like feeling calm if their baseline is highly activated, which makes sense. Of course, you'd feel calm. And alcohol is going to spike GABA, it's going to spike dopamine, it's going to spike serotonin. But as soon as it wears off, all three are going to downregulate. Which means serotonin crash, dopamine crash, and GABA crash. So if you take a system or a person that already has impaired glutamate's clearance, so glutamate is just swimming around in the brain saying, go, 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 do more, do more, do more, do more, do more, do more, do more. Just constantly. That's your baseline. Constantly. And then you throw in a substance that, when it wears off, causes GABA to downregulate. This creates, honestly, pretty catastrophic effects. I'm not going to be over dramatic here. You don't want to see the effect of that. You don't. Because what happens is GABA is what regulates glutamate indirectly. So when GABA downregulates, that means glutamate spikes, and all of a sudden you get all those symptoms magnified. So if you're autistic and if you have an alcohol problem, you might actually experience worse symptoms after the alcohol wears off from that downregulation. If you're not autistic and you have an alcohol problem, this is still true, although it's probably not going to have as magnified of an impact. But, be sure you don't have some of those other conditions too that can cause glutamate problems. And there's a long list of conditions that can mess with glutamate and GABA ratios. I mean, just off the top of my head, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, probably dissociative identity disorder. There's autism, obviously, ADHD, literally ADHD. There's actually a ton of new research about glutamate dysregulation in ADHD specifically. Almost even more research recently than autism, which makes sense why autism and ADHD or so frequently comorbid. But so alcohol itself is a neurotoxin. And over time, with repeated use, alcohol can actually destroy hippocampal cells. So let me back up a bit. What is a hippocampus? The hippocampus is the part of the brain that's responsible for memory. It's responsible for long-term memory. It's responsible for learning, too. Alcohol disrupts the hippocampus and can cause something called neurogenesis, disrupting it. Neurogenesis is the birth of new neurons. So alcohol can literally kill the birth of new neurons in the hippocampus, causing cell death or atrophy, which can lead to memory loss, cognitive decline, and reduced brain volume. So here we have a terrible combination, really. A terrible combination. People who have that baseline dysregulation are going to be more drawn to alcohol because of GABA and glutamate ratios being off. They already have that problem baseline, okay, in these vulnerable populations. That's the baseline issue. Throw alcohol on top of that, and you have a neurotoxin, which messes up that ratio even further, making everything worse. And it's a neurotoxin, so it is literally deleting memories, deleting neurons, preventing the birth of new neurons. It is deleting memories. It is causing a controlled form of dissociation over time. And a lot of people turn to it as a pain mechanism to escape from the pain that they don't want to face. They don't want to feel the pain that they had as a kid, as an adult, as a trauma memory. They don't want to feel the pain because pain hurts, so what do? They ignore it, they pretend it doesn't exist, and then they go drink. Just a few more wine glasses, a few more beers. What, the 5th wine glass? I'll be fine. Are words that I've heard before from people in my family and others. And so, let's take a look at the ramifications of this. Here we have, honestly, probably a majority of the population willingly and voluntarily consuming neurotoxins as a pain coping mechanism. Because people have been through so much pain and so much trauma, they're suffering so much, they can't stand it. Their nervous systems cannot handle it. And they are poisoning themselves. It's a neurotoxin. So, okay, let me back up a bit. As a person in life, do you want to remember your life? Do you want to remember the experiences you've had? Or do you want to be stuck in a dissociative spiral that you can never get out of? And I'm not talking about conditions like DID, that's a different topic. But to willingly consume a substance that causes the disruption of new neural cells and deletes memories. This can wreck your life. I mean, it seems so obvious from my perspective because all of the data is terrible. I mean, it's pretty clear. The data is pretty clear that this is a substance that is literally poisoning your brain and your liver. But it's not logical. That's the thing. It's not a logical decision to pick up the next glass. It's not a logical decision to go out and binge drink 6 beers. It's not a logical decision to do things that you'd regret in an inebriated state with no memory of it. But how convenient it is that people believe that they don't have to take accountability for their actions for the things that they don't remember. Newsflash, you still do. If you don't remember hurting someone, you still have to take accountability for hurting them. Because impact matters over intent. Impact actually matters more than intent. And this is something I didn't understand for a really long time. Because I was like, oh, if this person wasn't trying to hurt me, this person wasn't trying to hurt others, but are you going to stand in front of a lion who hasn't eaten in 2 weeks and wonder why it's trying to eat you? No. No, you're not. It's not logical. And so there's so many other problems that alcohol causes. Neurotoxicity. It can destroy hippocampus nerve cells. Long-term or excessive drinking can cause hippocampal atrophy. That means this part of the brain that is responsible for memories is literally shrinking. It's literally shrinking. So it's literally deleting memories. So people in pain are consuming a neurotoxin voluntarily that reduces their inhibitions, and then they cause pain to others and forget ever doing it. They completely forget it because the same drug that reduces their inhibitions to prevent them from saying and doing all these shitty things is the same drug that is deleting memories. So, I'm going to back up for a second. If you're a parent, or if you're listening to this and you're a parent, do you want to remember the moments you spent with your kids? Or if you're not a parent and you have dogs or cats, do you want to remember the times that you spent with your pets? Or even if you don't have any of that, do you want to remember the things you've done in your life? Do you want the consistency of character that you've dreamt of and desired? Or maybe you haven't dreamed of those things. But do you want to remember? I mean, honestly, what's the point of us being here in this moment, experiencing things right now in this life? What's the point if you're going to just delete all your memories? And I know that addiction is not logical. And this is really the big problem. The problem with the reason addiction is so challenging to overcome is because it's not logical. If it was a logical decision, people could just say no. And that would be that, and problem solved, and it would be that easy. But it isn't. It's because alcohol is filling those gaps between glutamate and GABA ratios. Because a lot of people have genetic variants, which decreases GABA and prevents the clearance of glutamate. So not only do you have glutamate firing constantly, go, 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 but you also have less GABA telling you to just chill out. And it magnifies the problem. It magnifies things tremendously. And so you might ask, if it magnifies the problem so significantly, then why do people with GABA and glutamate ratio impairments, why do they keep reaching for these drugs and alcohol? Why do people even want to drink in the first place? Well, it's because GABA temporarily increases from alcohol. But it comes at the expense of long-term downregulation, which means less GABA long-term. So you're literally buying 3 to 4 hours of peace, or perceived peace. Whether that is peace or not is a different question. You're buying 3 or 4 hours of peace at the expense of future you. You are prioritizing the presence of something to quell your pain and anxiety at the expense of your long-term physical, emotional, and mental health, and sometimes even the expense of your relationships. Do you think people are still going to trust you if you say a bunch of shit while you're drunk? How hard do you think that would be if a kid is hearing all these things and trying to figure out if you mean it or not? Are people truly their real selves while they're drunk? Or are they simply operating from their own projections? I would argue that most of the time people are operating on their own projections anyways, and that alcohol probably only compounds that issue. But it's a complicated problem. I really feel a lot of sadness and compassion to people who struggle with addiction. because I understand why they would turn to that substance. Because it fills the void. It fills those gaps. But there are better coping mechanisms. And it's not that you can just make a choice to stop. But you can replace your habits with new neural pathways to do other activities. So if you catch yourself reaching for a drink instead, maybe you go to the gym, or maybe you take a walk outside, or maybe you pet your dog, or maybe you go sit next to a tree and give it a hug. You know, trees boost serotonin, being in nature boosts serotonin. And so you can create habits over time that shift those neural pathways. The urge to drink is still going to be there because addiction is a hell of a drug, quite literally. Even the first drink of alcohol can rewire the brain for addiction, unfortunately. But help, it does exist, and hope does exist. And I don't believe that it's right for people to just give up on themselves. I think people are worth more than that. I think that people deserve to be able to just see what life is like without being under the influence of alcohol. To just know, like, the kind of beauty that is already here. I mean, I understand things are painful, and I understand that you want to numb that pain. But if numbing that pain comes at the expense of yourself, really ask yourself, is that what I want to do with my life? And so dopamine increases from drinking as well, which is part of the reason addiction is so difficult to break, because people get addicted to that dopamine high. Oh, I feel more motivated. Let's do it over and over again. But, there's other activities that can boost dopamine too. And it also, ethanol triggers endorphin releases, aka numbing, pain relief, like opioids. But there's other activities that trigger that as well. There's other choices. You're not just bound to one choice. You're not just bound to binge drinking and crying on your own. You're not just bound to one thing. Obviously, if you are listening to this and you're able to drink responsibly, then kudos to you. I'm glad to hear it. But from what I've observed, a lot of people can't do this. And it makes sense why they can't, because this neurotoxin literally is designed to be addictive, to skyrocket all your neurotransmitters, and to fill in the void of GABA that is missing in many conditions, mental health conditions, and other conditions as well. Don't even get me started on how this affects serotonin. When you drink, your serotonin increases, but then when the alcohol wears off, serotonin drops. Is it any wonder why there's the whole trope of someone being depressed and drunk? It's not a wonder at all in my mind. And in fact, repeated drinking over time can decrease serotonin neurons, the total number, or the sensitivity of them, which can cause even more problems. And over time, drinking can reduce global brain communication too. I've mentioned global brain communication in a few of the other podcast episodes. But brain communication globally is like different areas of the brain communicating with each other. So if global communication between different areas decreases, it literally is like creating a controlled dissociation. It's pretty bad. And then, of course, chronic alcohol disrupts your gut flora, your bacteria, intestinal junctions, bacterial overgrowth. It triggers that. I mean, if you start reading into some of the research, it's pretty bad. And what does it do most potently? Suppresses adult hippocampus neurogenesis. So now the hippocampus can't adequately encode memories. In other words, if you experienced an event and someone who was wasted experiences that same event, in that person's brain, that memory never encodes. It never happened. So a lot of people, if you spend enough time around people who drink a lot, it will feel like you're being gaslit because the memory never encoded. The memory of what they've said and what they've done simply did not encode. They don't remember. And that's what's really hard to accept. Why people would willingly drink and take a substance which would destroy memories. Maybe you can tell at this point that memory loss is one of my greatest fears. It's one of the many reasons I will never drink. Oh, there's more though. Let's look at some of the neuroimaging. If you look at the brain of an alcoholic, you will see dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, aka the thinking part of the brain, shows volume rejections up to 20%. 20%. This is the part of the brain that analyzes, along with the frontal lobes, cingulate cortex, insula. I made another video on the insula if you want to hear more about that. And striatum. Striatum is the part of the brain that feels rewards. So alcohol can actually blunt the feeling of other rewards over time, making other activities less rewarding. So you find yourself picking up that bottle again because it's the only reward that works. You've blunted your brain so much at that point that nothing else is rewarding. That sounds so depressing, honestly. I mean, I'm laughing, but I'm laughing as a coping mechanism because it's really sad. It's really sad. Cellular degeneration, Purkinje, cell loss. I made another video about Purkinje cells and how it relates to autism. So, basically what I'm telling you here, TLDR for anyone who doesn't need to remember the science behind it, alcohol can make almost every single symptom of autism and other conditions worse. In fact, I don't know if there's any condition that alcohol will seriously improve. It's debatable. It's really debatable. But in other words, if it was logical, then don't drink. That's the logical answer. But unfortunately for people who are stuck in addiction, it is not logical. It is their nervous system experiencing too much pain in different ways and trying to find a coping mechanism to reduce that pain. And that's an important thing to talk about and understand because a lot of people frame it like willpower. Oh, you can just will your way through it. No, it doesn't work like that. If alcohol is filling the void of GABA that you're not getting, either because of your genes or other conditions or environment factors, you can't just take away a person's only coping mechanism and expect them to be okay. It doesn't work like that. You got to replace it with something. You got to add to it. Don't try to take away before you add. You have to have an alternative first before you can actually 100% stop your addiction. You got to find that alternative. You got to be consistent with that alternative, and that consistency builds the habits to get you out of that addiction spiral. And it's hard. A lot of people don't talk about how hard it is because they're scared. It's really hard. If you're addicted to something, it's really hard to stop, both psychologically because you know that the next time you partake in that, you're going to be feeling that dopamine firing like crazy, or the serotonin, or the oxytocin. Feeling bonded to other people because you're both drunk. Feeling bonded to other people because, well, if you're both in an inebriated state, then maybe the things that you did that were not okay makes that feel a little bit easier to handle. There's so many other consequences to alcoholism as well from a neuroscience perspective. And then look at nicotine too. Alcohol modulates nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Wow, suddenly it makes sense why people who smoke also usually drink as well. There's a lot of research that suggests that ADHD changes the acetylcholine receptors in various ways. That probably deserves an entire episode all on its own, hopefully with someone who understands it even more than I do and can explain it. But, so why are people smoking? The same reason, to fill the void. To balance out those acetylcholine receptors. And so alcohol modulates those same receptors. So people with ADHD are trying to solve that problem, whether it's from a choline perspective or from a dopamine perspective, and then they get hooked. Whether it's smoking or alcohol, they get hooked because those mesolimbic pathways, the area of the brain that also experiences and causes a feeling of reward, they're firing constantly. And so, of course, you're going to feel more motivated to do all the things you got to do in your life when you're being rewarded. It makes sense. But then what happens is both smoking and alcohol can downregulate those dopamine receptors over time, which then worsens the original baseline issues. It's crazy how all of this is the same pattern. It's the same pattern every time. And so now I also want to mention, before I end this episode, I want to talk about withdrawal too. When people decide to finally quit, okay, I'm going to quit alcohol. I'm going to quit smoking. It has wrecked my life too much. I'm going to quit. Well, withdrawal unmasks every compensation at the same time, simultaneously. Those receptors, the glutamate receptors, aka NMDA receptors, that's the receptor that processes glutamate, they're no longer being suppressed by alcohol. So they're upregulated. Those receptors generate massive calcium influx and can cause neuronal death, which sucks. It's like, wait, you're saying if I stop drinking, it's also going to cause problems? Yeah, it will. And that's what I'm saying. You have to have something to replace it with. You have to figure out another activity that can meet that same balancing act that alcohol provides. You have to replace it with an activity that boosts GABA or clears glutamate, or preferably both, in order to prevent those withdrawal symptoms. So what happens in a brain that has down-regulated GABA or up-regulated NMDA receptors or both? What does that even look like? Well, here's a long list of symptoms that it can look like. Tremors, anxiety, insomnia, autonomic problems like tachycardia, fast heart rate, hypertension, seizures, delirium, hallucinations, agitation, cardiovascular instability. Cardiovascular instability. So even quitting causes problems. So the safest option is not to start. But if people are already hooked, if we have the majority of the population already hooked on alcohol, well, what can we do about that? You got to replace it with something else that will balance out the nervous system and provide the same role that alcohol is providing. Because without that, no way, no form of quitting is even going to work. You can't quit something that's actually helping you cope in your life in meaningful ways. Whether that's from a trauma perspective, whether that's from a GABA perspective, whether that's from a dopamine perspective or a serotonin perspective. You have to find alternative activities that can trigger that same experience to fill that void. And that's what's so difficult. You know, a lot of people think drinking is the only way. I can't be calm unless I pick up a drink. I can't socialize unless I pick up a drink. I can't be myself if I don't pick up a drink, which is probably the most heartbreaking one right there. Because at that point, they've defined their whole identity based on drinking. And if your whole identity is based on drinking, what happens when drinking is gone? But there's a you behind that. There's a you behind the alcohol. There's a you behind the drugs, the smoking. There's a you that I'm desperately trying to reach and will always try to reach. There's a you there, a you that matters, a you that's meaningful, a you that I want to connect with, a you that I want to talk to, a you I want to have a conversation with, a you that I want to understand, a you that's worthy of living, worthy of remembering, a you that is worthy of all the great things that life has to offer. And I know it's hard to believe that, especially if you're stuck in a place of darkness. It's hard. It's hard to remember. But the you is still there. And that's someone who, despite any addictions, still matters, is still inherently worthy and is still alive. And as long as you're alive, you have the capacity for change. Thank you for listening.